Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica, and this is another preview recap video for the Scarlet Keys preview season. This is the video for the end of August, which, despite being slightly later than I planned, is still happening before the end of August, so I'll count it as a win. In this video, we're going to be talking about 5 new cards: Underworld Market, previewed by Playing Board Games; Friends in Low Places, previewed by Miskatonic University Radio; At a Crossroads, previewed by Mythosbusters; Underprepared, previewed by Mythosbusters as well; and Exploit Weakness, previewed by Reddit. Starting up, we have Underworld Markets, previewed by Playing Board Games. This is a 0 cost, 2 XP, level 2 rogue asset. Because it is permanent and exceptional, it is actually 4 XP. And it reads, you get plus 10 deck size. It has a reaction: before drawing your opening hand, choose 10 illicit cards from your deck, shuffle them together, and place them next to Underworld Market as your market deck. And then at the start of your turn, you have another reaction: reveal the top 2 cards of your market deck. You may spend 1 resource to draw one of them, place the rest on the bottom in any order. It has the connection and illicit traits. That means Preston cannot take this. So yeah, this is somewhat similar to the Seeker card from Innsmouth, not Dream Eaters, Innsmouth, Ancestral Knowledge. Like that card, it gives you an increased deck size, but it also takes some number of cards out of your deck, forms it into a separate deck that you can then recover those cards from. Though Underworld Market works slightly different in the sense that you don't get to pick exactly which cards you're getting. You're getting 2 cards from the top every time, and you have to pay to get them out. However, you get 10 cards in a separate deck, and the order of the deck is going to be known as soon as you've gone through it once. So after the first 5 turns, you should know the exact order of your market deck, as you always place the cards back on the bottom in any order, so you should know what's coming next. Keep in mind that you can buy either, when you reveal 2 cards, you can reveal either the one card or the other card, or neither. You don't have to buy a card. So that's kind of the choices you have. So you have to pick between a whole bunch of illicit cards. Basically, we've been talking about illicit a lot because it really feels like Scarlet Keys is the illicit expansion for Rogue. We have a lot of illicit investigation tools, lockpicks, damning testimony, thieves kits. We have illicit firearms, the 25 automatic, the Thompson, the sawed-off shotgun. But more than that, we also have a bunch of other things that we can do with illicit cards, such as the Tennessee Sour Mash giving us a boost on willpower tests, Hidden Pockets, one of the new preview cards, giving us a additional slot, and cards like Pickpocketing, Payday, and Fence rewarding us and giving us more economy. I'll take that as also sort of an economy card in that it lets you play a card with a discount and fast. I think the market is fantastic, and I think it is a core element of a illicit deck, this archetype that's really looks like it's being fleshed out for this expansion. Finn obviously should be over the moon about this card, but I think most rogues are probably going to run this, except of course Preston, can't take it. And it's worth noting that the plus 10 deck size, but then taking 10 cards out, that's in my opinion just pure upside. As long as you have 10 illicit cards in your deck, you're just going to be increasing the amount of cards you're basically drawing, spending money to draw cards, which is a pretty good trade, right? 1 resource for 1 card is a good trade. And it just means that you get to run 10 additional cards on top of the illicit cards you were already planning on taking. Or you get to run a couple of illicit cards you maybe didn't have deck space for before. I think that at this point in the game, I'm often struggling to find space for the cards that I want to run, right? There's so many good cards that I feel like I need to run to have my deck function properly that it can be tricky to find the space for the like cheeky includes or the fun stuff. And I think cards like the Underworld Market or Ancestral Knowledge that increase your deck size, especially if they do so in a way that doesn't actually reduce the efficiency of your mulligan, I think are fantastic. And the probability of you finding whatever you need from the market quick enough is pretty high, because even in the worst case scenario, you're getting the card in 5 turns. And assuming that you're looking for something like a gun or a investigate tool and you have multiple copies, you're probably getting it within the first 2 turns. So I don't think market is going to be unreliable enough that you can't rely on getting your stuff fast enough. So I really like this design. I love this card. I'm expecting to play it in a lot of decks. So yeah, that's Underworld Market. Next up, we have Friends in Low Places, previewed by Miskatonic University Radio. Friends in Low Places is a customizable card. It is a customizable event that costs 0 resources, has an intellect and agility icon, and has the favorite trait. And it reads, customizable. When you purchase Friends in Low Places, choose and record a trait on its upgrade sheet. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck. For each looked at card with the chosen traits, you may spend 1 resource to add that card to your hand, shuffle the remaining cards into your deck. Pleasure doing business with you, Miss O'Banion, and that is Naomi O'Banion, and I believe that's probably Charlie Kane. I don't quite know, it's definitely a politician, having drinks with the notorious mobster Naomi O'Banion. And here's the upgrade sheet. Previously I've been doing a kind of blurry upgrade sheet and revealing it one at a time, but I think both for this card and maybe just going forward, I will be doing it slightly differently, where I'm going to be trying to showcase which investigators I think certain upgrades really like. And this is a very broad approach, right? Obviously, this is not going to be exhaustive. There's going to be a lot of different upgrades that apply to a lot of different investigators, and it's really more meant as inspiration for you. But let me know if you like this style or the old style more in the comments below, because I'm genuinely curious what the feedback's going to be. So first up, we have the helpful upgrade for 1 XP. When you play Friends in Low Places, you may choose another investigator at your location to resolve its effect. And for this one, I was immediately thinking of Bob Jenkins, the salesman, who is somebody who can play item assets from other investigators' hands. So you name item with Friends in Low Places, and you can help your teammate find that one item they really need, and then you can use Bob's ability to help play them. You get to give them the resources if they need them. Just seems like it slots right in. In general, item is going to be a very broad, very useful trait because so many cards have the item trait that I think it's a good choice for Friends in Low Places. Because keep in mind, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck, any card that doesn't have the chosen trait, and you have to choose the trait at deck creation or whenever you add this card to your deck, it's just useless, right? So I think this card is kind of tricky in that sense, in that it's not a very reliable search effect unless you're picking a trait that has a lot of cards in your deck. Fortunately, we have an upgrade that helps with that. Versatile lets you pick another trait, and when you play Friends in Low Places, you may choose one of the look at cards with both chosen traits to add to your hand without spending the resource. So this is an interesting upgrade because it kind of goes 2 different directions. Getting to pick another trait is very nice, obviously, to increase the likeliness of finding cards that you can actually add to your hand. But if you pick a trait that overlaps with your first chosen trait, you have the possibility of drawing cards without having to spend additional resources. However, I don't think you want to pick traits that are completely covering one another. So for example, you could pick item and firearm, but if you do that, every firearm is always going to be an item, so you're really just narrowing down your search option. On the other hand, if you do something like item and illicit, we've got a bunch of non-item illicit cards in this expansion. This is both broadening your pool and giving you a potential additional benefit when you hit both things, which I like. I think in general, rogues are going to have the economy to draw these cards by paying for them. So I would rather get more options than having to not spend the resources. Obviously, both is very nice. And I don't have to tell you that Finn Edwards loves illicit cards, so we're here for Finn getting to play a versatile Friends in Low Places. Next, we have a somewhat unusual card, Bolstering. For each card added to your hand by Friends in Low Places gains a wild icon until the end of the phase. This is the moment where you remember, oh, right, this works on skills. Because I honestly, until I read this, I was like, right, so I'm going to find like the asset that I really want, or maybe an event that's like very powerful. But no, you can find skills with this. And that's, of course, fantastic for Winifred. I don't think Winifred often struggles for icons, but I can definitely see this as a kind of reload function for her, where she's maybe been hit by some kind of treachery that made her discard a bunch of cards, play Friends in Low Places to refill her hand very quickly. And there are 2 traits that are on almost every skill, if not every skill, practiced and innate. And so hitting them with that, fantastic. Getting that extra little wild icon on there just makes you get back into the game that much faster. Next up, we have a very interesting upgrade, the Clever upgrade. Instead of shuffling the remaining cards into your deck, you may place each of them on top of your deck in any order. Now, this is an effect that we've seen a little bit in the previous expansion, Edge of the Earth, where the order of cards in your deck and knowing what's on top of your deck is a very powerful effect. One of the most important cards of that probably being Foresight, a 1 XP Mystic card that if you know which card you're going to draw before you draw it, you get to play that card at -2 cost. And so I could definitely see someone like Sefina playing this, naming Spell maybe, or something else. Like Sefina can go a lot of different directions with this card, but using this to stack her deck in such a way that she can use it to play the card at -2 cost, or cancel the card's effect and discard it, which matters if you're going to draw a weakness, right? If nothing else, this can bury your weakness that you saw 6 cards deep, or 5 cards deep, I suppose, and just not worry about it. Interesting, this is the only upgrade on the list where you might actually be inclined not to grab as many cards as you can, because knowing which cards are on top could be very important. Next we have Prompt, which just gives the card fast and play during any free trigger window. This is a very powerful upgrade, and I'm actually back to Winifred, because combining Prompt with Bolstering means that we now have a very powerful Mythos defense. We name Innate for a trait, and we find a bunch of willpower boosting cards during the Mythos phase, giving us a bunch of extra wildcard icons as well, helps us pass those tricky tests. I think that this is just pretty generic, good, powerful upgrades, because making cards fast is good, and only costing 2 XP means I don't think it's going to be that hard to slap this onto friends in low places. Next up, we have Experienced. Increase the number of cards looked at by 3. Now, this would be Mandy's upgrade, or rather that what Mandy's ability does, but it's at this point that I just quickly want to point out that Friends in Low Places actually specifies that it is a look at and not a search. That's a little, yeah, it's a little shenanigansy, but on the other hand, the problem that they ran into is that you can manipulate the different cards you find in so many different ways that it was actually breaking the rules if it worked with Mandy. So FFG and Maxine said that they're like, yeah, we're just gonna make it a look at so it doesn't work with Mandy and doesn't break anything. So yeah, we can pay 3 XP to increase the number of cards, and that's actually very important if you want to use this to find some harder to find cards. Like, we don't have a lot of effects that can let you search for talents. If you want to use this to be a talent searcher, which I could see wanting to do that, then you definitely want the experience, because only looking at 6 cards, you're going to miss a lot of the time, and this card does nothing if you're not finding one of the cards you need to find. So get that extra 3 cards, because going from 6 to 9, it changes the number a lot. And then finally, Swift. You may play one of the cards added to your hand, paying its cost. This is just an extra action basically built into playing Friends in Low Places. It obviously combines with Prompt to get a free trigger whenever to play the card. And for this one, I'm just going to shout out Preston. Preston actually hasn't been getting a lot of cards in this new expansion, mostly because of the fact that he's got a no illicit deck building clause, and a lot of the rogue cards so far have been illicit. But this is a card that I think Preston really likes. In fact, Preston might like this card naming Favor, because a lot of the other cards that Preston likes to play if he has a lot of money are favors, and it means it can find the other copy of itself, right? So you can find the other Friends in Low Places to play at a later point. And Preston probably has enough money that he can, Friends in Low Places, find one of the favors and then play that favor with his spare cash, getting a lot of powerful effects in one. I really like this card. I think it's versatile. I think it has a lot of different options, and I think it's just generically kind of good. I don't think it's as powerful as some people were worried about. Like, drawing a bunch of cards on a single event is very powerful, and we've seen that with a lot of secret cards. And some people were very worried this was going to be like the next, I don't even remember what they were comparing it to. I think Preposterous Sketches or something like No Stone Unturned. And I think it's far too narrow to be one of those cards, because you have to pick the trait at deck creation, or if you're including it later, whenever you add it to your deck. So it's never going to be a card that can just search your deck for whatever you need. You have to include this in your deck with a very specific game plan in mind. Now, I'm not saying that's not powerful. I think it will be powerful, but I think the useful traits are more limited than a lot of people realize. And I think that if you name a very narrow trait without the experienced upgrade, you're just going to be looking at a hand of 6 cards that don't interact with this card at all, and going to be very disappointed. Moving on, we have At a Crossroads, a dilemma card previewed by Mythosbusters. Like all dilemmas, it has no cost. It does have 1 XP. It has no icons either. It's a dilemma and insight traded, and it reads max 2 dilemma per round, and then it has a revelation effect, as all the dilemmas so far have had. Choose an investigator and decide. Choose 1. The chosen investigator would immediately take an action as if it were their turn, then discards 1 card at random from their hand, or the chosen investigator loses 1 action during their next turn, then draws 3 cards. So this is kind of Swift Reflexes and Preposterous Sketches on 1 card. And I actually think this is the best dilemma they've printed they've shown so far, and it's not particularly close either. So the reason for that is that one of these modes is almost always going to be good, which is the draw 3 cards one. It's very hard to imagine a situation where losing one action to draw 3 cards is not a reasonable thing to do. It might not be exactly what you're trying to do at that point, but it's very rarely going to be a big problem and a big downside. So this is why I think at the Crossroads could go in just about any deck, whereas a lot of the other dilemma we've seen so far has the potential of really backfiring if you don't think about what it would do if you draw it at an unfortunate time. And, you know, survivors don't really have the shenanigans to be manipulating their deck order that much. They could fish it out of the discard pile, which helps, but I think a lot of the time, or a lot of the discussion I've seen online at least, has been very worried about hitting the dilemma and something bad happening, which makes sense for the card type and makes sense for the kind of story they're trying to tell. And I actually really like that. I like having more player cards that are unpredictable and kind of exciting in that sense. But I also recognize that, yeah, if you play Heat the Dream and then you remove a bunch of very good cards from your deck, you might feel kind of salty. That being said, I think this card is great. I think this card could go in just about anybody. But there's one investigator I think who makes use of the first mode a little bit better than most, and that is Patrice. Patrice gets to redraw her entire hand every turn. So drawing at the Crossroads means that you could discard one of her other 4 cards that you drew to get 4 actions, well, 1 action right then and then 3 actions on the next turn. And if there's one thing I'm often struggling with Patrice, it is action efficiency, or rather, sorry, action compression or more actions, right? Move actions, actions to do random skill tests on encounter cards or whatever you need to do. Oftentimes those really bog Patrice down because she draws 5 cards every turn, and having to play multiple of those while also maintaining whatever else the scenario is asking for you can be a lot. Getting 1 additional action for a card that you don't really care about is a great deal for her, and I think she's really going to like this card. And even if you don't want to lose that random card, because it is a random discard, which is the tricky part, right? If it wasn't a random discard, I think this could go in just about anybody to get additional actions at a cost of like 2 cards. But for Patrice, you really, you're the only one who like typically is throwing away most of her cards anyway. But even then, if you don't want to discard your card because maybe you also drew your violin in the same hand, you're like, I don't want to risk it. Just have somebody else in your team draw 3 cards. It's still good, right? So I really like At a Crossroads in Patrice, and I look forward to seeing people try it. Next up, we have another weakness, Underprepared. This one was also previewed by Mythosbusters. And it reads, it is a 1-cost event weakness. It's a basic weakness. It's a blunder. It reads, Survivor Investigator only. Play only if Underprepared is the only card in your hand, and only if you have exactly 1 resource in your resource pool. While Underprepared is in your hand, each card you commit to skill test is considered to have 1 fewer matching skill icons. Now, the way I think this is supposed to work is you can still commit cards that only have a single matching icons for their abilities. They just won't add to the skill test, or to your skill value. So you're still allowed to commit a resourceful or something like that. You're just not getting any of the skill benefits. The reaction to this card has been divisive. There have been some players who say that this is disastrous. This is one of the worst weaknesses we've seen so far. Whereas other players, kind of myself included, don't think it's that bad. And the big takeaway here is that I'm comparing it to cards like the 13th Vision or Haunted, which both just kind of reduce your skill value by 1. Haunted is, I think, the best example. It just says you get -1 to each of your skills. If you're only committing 1 card to each skill test, this card is kind of identical to Haunted, only you can't spend a double action to clear it. I think that's fine. I acknowledge that Underprepared is a hard card to get rid of. Having 1 card in hand, only this thing, and only 1 resource, so basically going broke to play this, is difficult. It's gonna set you back a bunch. But I think having this card in hand isn't the end-all be-all punishment. You're not losing health, you're not losing sanity, you're not forced to discard cards or lose resources. You can discard cards or lose resources at your own tempo, whenever you can spend them to further your position in the scenario. And so I think what you want to do, if you have this as your weakness, is bring lots of cards that let you spend your cards in hand to get ahead, so that then when you are kind of ahead of the scenario, you can take a moment to pause, discard Underprepared, and then rally back into it and hopefully keep going, right? It's not a weakness that I think you should try to clear as soon as you draw it. You should think about when in maybe 2 or 3 turns you can clear it, and make sure you have the tools to stay in the game for those 2 or 3 turns. And I think that is going to require some deck building and some play strategizing, but it does work. Important to point out here, I think Cornered isn't affected by this because you're not committing the cards. So if you want to get a kind of cheap way of getting past Underprepared, just play Cornered. Dark Horse, likewise, if you're worried about losing too much skill value, then just go Dark Horse, and then now you have skill value again. There are 2 investigators I think that hit the hardest by this, because, you know, someone like Bob can just never commit skills. I think Ashcam Pete might not like it, but he has answers as well. But I think Patrice and Silas get hurt the most by this. Silas, I think, is fairly straightforward. He wants to play lots of skills, though it's worth pointing out that at least my Silas decks often run skills with lots of 2 and 3 icons, which are hurt less bad by this, right? If you commit a Daring, it's still 2 icons. If you commit a Overpower, it's still an icon, right? You're not losing everything. And if you at least have some other tools that you're using, you're probably still going to have some skill value. It's not just going to completely nuke you. For Patrice, the committing part is less bad. The problem for her is that she doesn't want this sticking in her hand, reducing the number of cards she draws every turn. For her, it's a little bit awkward to try to clear, but fortunately, Patrice already has tools that you want to use to clear out her hand every turn. And at least the way I've always played her, she doesn't tend to stick on a high amount of resources. She tends to get a couple of resources and then play a card, going down to 0, and then using things like the branch in her violin to get back up. As such, I think Patrice doesn't like this weakness. I think it hurts her quite a bit, but I also don't think it's that hard for her to clear it. So it's mostly going to be about that action, finding a spot where you can actually clear this. And otherwise, you do what you gotta do. I think weakness is having a little bit of thief and being able to kind of hurt you and force you in certain deck building decisions is generally a good thing. So I think I'm okay with this card existing. I don't think it's going to be an auto ban for me. This is no Doomed. Next up, and final card for this video, is Exploit Weakness, previewed by Reddit. Exploit Weakness is a 2-cost 0 XP survivor event with a combat and agility icon. It has the tactic and trick traits, which is relevant mostly for Mark and Parallel Roland, I believe. Trying to remember if anybody else who cares about tricks, I don't believe so. Anyway, it reads, Fast. Play before revealing a Chaos token during an attack or evasion attempt you are performing, and only if the difficulty of this test is currently 0. This test automatically succeeds. Instead of this test's normal effect, discard the attacked or evaded enemy. If it is a lead, automatically evade it and deal it 3 damage instead. This is a really interesting design. So we haven't seen survivors care about difficulty that much. They've had a couple of effects that let them manipulate the difficulty. Quick Learner lets them take the difficulty up and down. Drawing Thin lets them take the difficulty up for a benefit. But here we see a survivor card that specifically cares about you having a difficulty 0 test. And there are a couple of ways to make that happen. I kind of love that we can expose a weakness and then exploit that weakness, which is a Seeker event that lets you test Intellect X. If you succeed, treat the enemy's fight value as 0 for the next attack. Whereas Improvised Weapon is a survivor way, and there is also the Impromptu Barricade, which you can play to reduce the difficulty by 1, and then has a more powerful effect if you play it from the discard pile, while Exploit Weakness now also gives the first play a little bit more value. I think that being able to automatically discard enemies is very powerful, and the thing is that being able to completely negate the Chaos Bag is a very survivor thing to do and a very powerful thing to do. Even if it's a 2-cost event that requires you to be performing other shenanigans, I think this is a card worth looking at as a potential answer for very tricky enemies, right? If the Chaos Bag is really brutal, just being able to sidestep it completely by making the test auto-succeed is very nice, and getting rid of big health enemies without having to fight or evade them is very good. The fact that this does something if the enemy is elite is actually quite nice and more than I was expecting. If this just said that it only worked on non-elite enemies, I wouldn't have been surprised, but getting the 3 damage and automatic evade is a big benefit. We don't often see cards that are that powerful against elites, and I kind of like it for solo investigators. Now, I think there's one investigator who's definitely interested in this card, and that's of course Darryl Simmons, the survivor for this expansion. He has a free triggered ability that lets him reduce the difficulty of a test by 2 by spending evidence from assets he controls. For Darryl, he doesn't need as many tools and tricks to reduce the difficulty of enemy fight or evade tests. He can just use his evidence. If you're playing solo Darryl, I think Exploit Weakness is going to be a must-take, at least for now and at least with a limited card pool, just to have some answers to trickier, tougher enemies. So yeah, that's Exploit Weakness, and that is in fact the 5 cards I'm going to be talking about today. Thank you so much for watching. I will be doing more videos soon because there are still more previews coming out. We have about a month of preview season left, maybe a little bit less. We still have 1 investigator left to be revealed, and we have a bunch more cards left to see, so I hope you stick around, subscribe if you haven't yet. Thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.